So, despite my name, I usually don't talk about Detroit issues much on this channel, but I gotta make an exception. 2 Thursdays ago, on the 24th of September, the Detroit Chief of Police, James Craig, jumped on the "protesters are financed by outside Marxists" bandwagon. The evidence? U-Haul trucks full of canvas signs. Let's look at exactly what he said. It's in this tweet, about a minute in, on Fox and Friends.
Not about Breonna Taylor. It wasn't about George Floyd. They embed themselves in peaceful protests, and frankly, they have another agenda, and we know what that agenda is.
And that is?
I believe it's a Marxist ideology. It doesn't matter. I'll give you an example, Brian.
Does it surprise you that Donald Trump really likes the police chief? Yeah. U-Hauls. I mean, you can legit rent them at gas stations. I remember when I lived in Detroit in the early 2000s, there was this gas station on the corner of Palmer and Woodward that you could rent a U-Haul truck at. Don't know if it's still there, though. And did Detroit's chief of police actually say Marxist? I mean, what, are they going to come and talk to us about economic theory? Oh no, the horror! I am so sick of this idea that socialism, Marxism, and Soviet-style communism all mean the exact same thing, and they mean that you want bread lines, the secret police, and the ability to send people you don't like to Siberia. That's intellectually dishonest, and it's just using scare tactics to keep people from talking about real issues like policing. Because that's why Craig used the word Marxism, to scare people and distract people. In all seriousness, though, Craig's issues go a lot deeper than this one dumb viral moment. His policies have some serious issues which the Black Lives Matter protests have highlighted. In this video, I want to focus on 2 issues related to Detroit. One, the issue of police residency, which means if police should live in the cities they patrol. And 2, the excessive force that some police have used against some protesters and journalists during the Black Lives Matter protests. I've done some research on this, and all the news articles that I show we will link to in the video description. While restructuring and defunding the police is part of a national conversation, in Detroit these issues are especially complex. Let's start with residency, which is about requiring police officers to live in the cities they work for. To me, this seems like a no-brainer. Having police patrolling the areas they live in seems better than having police come in from outside and patrol an area they don't have a connection with. Residency requirements for police have been part of the discussion across the U.S. since the George Floyd shootings in May 2020. More importantly for Detroit, though, is how residency, race, and police intersect. To understand why, we have to go back a ways to 1967. That year, part of the long, hot summer, saw a massive race rebellion in Detroit, which started after police raided an after-hours bar in the city. Historians point to the division between Detroit's police, who are mostly white, and the city's residents, who are mostly black, as a source for this tension. This division between black and white, and also between the city and its suburbs, has roots in the 1940s and 50s. As the city grew and highways were added, people began to move out to the suburbs. Well, that is, white people. African Americans could not easily purchase homes in white neighborhoods, thanks in part to systemic discrimination on the part of banks and real estate agents. This discrimination, called redlining, is the root of a lot of the continuing racial inequalities we see in Detroit currently. After the 1967 rebellion, which lasted 5 days, left 43 dead, and forever changed Detroit, Michigan required police officers to work in the cities they patrolled in. Police unions pushed back against this, but the requirements were in place for over 2 decades, until 1999. In Craig's Detroit Business, there's a fascinating article looking at the history of this. I really recommend checking it out and listening to the interview with the journalist who wrote it on Detroit Today. One statistic that really stuck out to me was this. Right now, only 3% of white police officers actually live in Detroit. 3%? That's awful. Let's listen.
There just are so few white officers who live in the city. It's 3%. It amounts to 29 of the 982 white officers actually reside in the city of Detroit.
And I think this gap between the people who live in Detroit versus the people who enforce the laws in Detroit further erodes trust between police and residents. It's true, changing this would have to be at the state level, but I think Governor Gretchen Whitmer would be more than happy to work to get legislation like this passed. She infamously sparred with Trump over lockdown rules this past summer. I mean, residency has been tried for other jobs, like Detroit's city council. Once council members lived in just a few wealthy neighborhoods, the city now has a combination of a district and at-large system. This means council members must live in the neighborhoods they represent. Okay, so if not residency as a requirement, what about offering incentives to people moving to Detroit, like income tax reductions? Because there's got to be a way to start to heal this decades-old rift between the police and the residents of Detroit. And are you at all surprised that James Craig opposes residency requirements for Detroit police? Yeah. Also, I think it's incredibly obnoxious that Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan is using this divisive rhetoric about outside suburban protesters in Detroit when the police themselves are from the suburbs. If you want to talk about community, help build a community, not poke at decades-old racial divides. Let's take a look at another issue police have under Craig's rule: the use of excessive force against both protesters and reporters covering the protests. Let's start with the protesters themselves. When I saw this video, streamed live by the Detroit Free Press, it really scared me. Here, we see Detroit police boxing peaceful protesters in before a mass arrest. I'll just go ahead and let it play.
And police are asking the protesters to get off the roadways, break up into small groups. But the group of protesters, it's pretty medium, 250 people perhaps, not budging. Police moving in. And they're closing in. And it's really a tense atmosphere here. Hands up, don't shoot has been the rally cry. And
here we go, first arrest.
First arrest. First arrest.
And soon after, those same officers took a knee for the camera.
Everybody's taking a knee, and the police are taking a knee with them. This is big. This is really big. Police are taking a knee.
Let me be clear. When officers do things like this is only symbolic. It's an empty gesture. It makes for good tweets, it makes for good TV, but it changes nothing. And I want to know why police officers have this type of equipment. It's not like Detroit is rolling in money. I mean, the city had to file for bankruptcy in 2013, and because of that, underwent a massive restructuring. Looking at this video is so frightening on so many levels. Why do police have this equipment? And how could this money have been better spent to help Detroit? Just FYI, this footage was shot at the end of May, before a group of Detroit Will Breathe took over organizing the Black Lives Matter protests. There's been so many stories and tweets and images from the protest, but here's one about Detroit police officers shooting 3 journalists with rubber bullets. At least the officer was charged? Speaking of spending money, I'm going to go back to my first point: residency for police. This was something I heard in the Detroit Today interview. I really think the key to Detroit's recovery is the schools, and unfortunately, fixing it is a vicious circle. Police and others don't want to live in Detroit, citing reasons like high crime and poor quality public schools. However, those public schools are funded by, wait for it, taxes on city residents. Less people living in the city, the lower quality the schools will be. I did a video on how public education is funded in the US, and unfortunately, our current system means that once a city's schools start to decline, it's very hard to improve them again. The issue is that funding is tied to the people who live in the city. It's a lot to untangle, but I think Craig should at least acknowledge this, and not go blaming Marxists or other boogeymen for the city's problems. But this isn't the first time he's had some seriously questionable judgment. Last summer, in 2019, he decided to use Detroit police to protect a group of Nazis marching in Detroit's gay pride. When I say Nazis, I mean, Nazis. The ones with the swastika and the hate. I'm not saying Nazis don't have the right to be Nazis, but maybe Have them hold their counter-protests somewhere else. Detroit's a big city. And don't act all surprised when people criticize the police for protecting literal Nazis. To be fair, Detroit police have made a few changes this year, like banning chokeholds and shooting for moving vehicles. But to me, it's a little like kneeling. Without structural change, this feels largely symbolic. There's a lot of other issues I could go into, from the shooting of Malice Green in 1992 to the shooting of deaf man Errol Shaw for holding a rake. It's also important to note that after Errol Shaw's death, then Mayor Dennis Archer asked for a federal probe into the police's use of deadly force. After that probe, the police increased training by 10 hours, from 16 to 26. I'd love to know what Detroit police's training looks like now, as these changes were made in 2006. I think all these issues are connected and have a lot to do with politicians fixing problems and not looking for the root cause, which is economic disparity and racial injustice. Those are hard things to deal with, but if Detroit is going to move forward, it has to. Thanks for watching. I've got links to all the news articles I showed in the video description. And remember, support local journalism. Show some love for the reporters covering all this stuff, from WET to the Detroit Free Press. I've also got links to Detroit Will Breathe, the group currently organizing anti-police protests in Detroit, as well as some links to bail funds for protesters. And remember, we're on social media, so do that thing. Like it, leave a comment, or just give me some nice analytics to look at.